Thanks, Craig. So, as Craig mentioned, we're going to be talking about a follow-up to the DEID. And I just would like to go ahead and thank all the partnerships and all the researchers and funding that goes into this project. It's been a huge effort on all different ends. So I just want to take a quick second and also acknowledge how much help the Utah Avalanche Center has been with developing the DEID and doing the research that goes into the DEID. And so Trent has come into the University of Utah, and I got to meet him there, and we did several different field experiments and got to work on the DEID with each other, and it was just a great opportunity, and I'm really thankful for all the help. So before we go into DEID part deux, we should do DEID part un. So what is the DEID? The DEID is the differential emissivity imaging distrometer, which is really just a fancy name for a thermal camera that looks down at a hot plate, as you can see there on the right-hand side. And so in order to kind of better understand how we use this setup to study snow in real time, we have here in the top part of the video, we have images taken from an SLR camera of snowflakes falling. And those snowflakes fall and they hit the hot plate. And when they hit the hot plate, it's like you have a hot pan and you throw water at that pan. And they hit the pan and they'll melt and then they'll sizzle and evaporate. And then on the left-hand side, we can use sophisticated image processing techniques and get information such as SWE. So more on the information that comes from the DEID. We get several different parameters, and I should go ahead and mention that none of these parameters are available real-time by any instrumentation that exists out in the field. You have ETI buckets that can provide good estimates for, say, hourly data, but real-time, second to minute data is really hard to come by. So the DEID takes these images, as seen in the bottom right here, of each individual snowflake, and then we can sum all those individual snowflakes together and get bulk parameters such as snow density as a function of time, snow mass as a function of time, the SWE rate, or the snow water equivalent, or how much snow is falling and how fast. We can get the total snow accumulation, right, so snow depth. And then we get these two fancy new parameters that I'm going to talk about in more detail today. So the first one is the shape density index, which is the SDI, and that's going to be defined as the ratio of our actual projected snowflakes. Imagine we have a dendrite falling on the hot plate compared to the melted area, so now it melts and it turns into a sphere. So we take the ratios of those areas. The other is complexity, and the complexity is basically going to understand how complex is a snow particle, right? Do we have grapple, which would be a complexity of 1, or do we have a dendrite that has really high complexity, so that would be greater than 1. So that's great. Now that we've done the DEID part 1, we have the data. What are we going to do with it? So we can do several different things that we would like to study. So the first one that we're going to talk about tonight is, can we forecast new snow avalanches with the data that's collected from the DEID? And just as a quick refresher, this is slightly different from Mark's talk as opposed to deep slab avalanches. New storm avalanches occur when the overlying stress of the weight of the new snow is greater than the strength between the layers within that new snow. And so these usually occur during or right after storms with additional stress, such as a skier. And you can also think of these occurring when we have an upside down snowpack, right? So we have mashed potatoes over smoke, we have heavy over light. And so the second thing, if we can actually do this, how effective are we at predicting these new snow avalanches? And with a little bit more information, can we go down the research rabbit hole and study if we can predict deep slab avalanches or other types of avalanches? So just a little bit of background on snow stability, and I think Mark gave a great intro into that. So the mechanical properties of snow depend strongly on their microstructure. So what does that mean? As you can see in the bottom right here, we have all these different snowflakes, and they have different shapes. And those shapes of the snowflakes are related to how strong that snow will be. And so what we really want to understand are two components. We want to understand the weight of the overburdened snow, and we want to know the strength of that snow that's lying beneath. As Mark said, it's the weighing between the two. So imagine we have a new snow storm come in, and we have a low density snow fall on top of our snowpack, and we have some high density snow fall on top. So we're going to call this our overburden stress, or the weight of the new snow on top. And then we also want to understand the shear strength that is between these layers. How strong is that bond between those new layers of snow that have fallen? And pretty simply, when our overburden, or the weight of the new snow, exceeds the strength of the snow within that new snow layer, we're going to observe avalanches. So thank goodness that there's been so much research on this in the past. We have a photo here of Bruce Jamieson on the right, and he has gone through the troubles and all the experimentation and measuring the literal shear strength of different snow crystals at different layers, and taking those measurements and relating them to the crystal types. So this is a nice table that was developed by Bruce Jamieson and others, which show the functional form of the shear strength of a layer of snow as a function of the snow density compared to ice, and these two parameters, which just so happen to be the SDI and the complexity, which we can measure with the DEID. Additionally, we need to know the overburden stress. Well, we have the density of the snow, we know how much snow has fallen, and we know gravity, and we can account for slope angle. So now that we have this great model with the DEID, what are we going to do with it, and how are we going to validate it? So thank goodness in Little Cottonwood Canyon we have a really impressive infrasound system that can observe not only the location of when avalanches happened, but the precise time at when these avalanches occur. And so this infrasound system sits on the Little Cottonwood ridgeline. And so on the top left here, you can see an image of all the different slide paths. And on the bottom right, you can see some example data that was taken from the Valentine's Day storm last season. And so here's a test case that we ran for the Valentine's Day storm. And so the black dots in this figure are going to represent the strength, and the red is going to represent the overburden stress. So when our overburden exceeds our strength, then we're going to observe, or we're going to predict that we're going to observe avalanches. So if we start this video, we can see for the first time this cat and mouse game that's occurring between the strength of our snowpack and the overburden in real time as our snow is evolving. And you can see periods at which they come together and they come apart, and then all of a sudden the red line crosses the black line and our first infrasound ping is detected. So we've been able, with the DEID, to begin to predict the onset of the timing of new snow avalanches. Now the question is, now that we can do this, how effective are we at it? So next up, we're going to be sifting through all the data this following year, or this past season, sorry, and we're going to validate statistically how well the DEID did at all the individual storms that happened. Okay, so that's great. So now that we've predicted, or have a model to predict new snow avalanches, can we try to predict dry slab or deep slab avalanches? So deep slab avalanches occur or fail at a weakened layer within the snowpack. And as Mark talked about, we need to understand how the snow evolves through the entire season to understand where and when these persistent layers exist and how they heal. And so in order to do this, we're going to have to run a numerical model called SNOWPACK. SNOWPACK is an energy balance model, much like Mark did his master's thesis on, and it models the snow for the entire season using just simple weather inputs. So on the bottom left here, we have an example of how the snow is changing throughout the season and progressing at the Atwater site up in near OLS in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And on the right, you can see how this could be applied to a 3D model. And so we can take this model and we can do hazard tests. And so within SNOWPACK, we have different hazard indices that we can study. And the first one is the propagation saw test and the critical cut length. So the critical cut length comes from the propagation saw test, and it has about 30 years of development and studying about how the PST can relate to instabilities in your snowpack. And it's been shown through the research that combinations of different stability indices, including the critical cut length, can predict the onset of deep slab avalanches with up to 73% accuracy. And we predict that using the DEID outputs, we can possibly improve these outputs. And so the question exists, why do we want to have slightly worse accuracy compared to a forecast that comes from the UAC? Well, the advantage that comes from adding this sort of tool to our toolbox goes from, we have this danger rows in the bottom left-hand side where we're having a forecast every 5,000 acres to having a slightly less accurate forecast, but at much higher resolution at every 6 feet. So we go ahead and this past season, we put a weather station up at the Mid-Collins study plot at Alta, Utah, and we model the snowpack for the entire season. And here's some example outputs from our model. from January 27th. On the left-hand side, we have a density profile where you can see the weak layer that's occurring right at 38 centimeters. And then on the right-hand side, we have the evolution of the snowpack. And as we know, we had a lot of faceting which occurred near the surface. And with some help with the ski patrol up at Alta, we dug a pit and we were able to validate the model and specifically isolate an area of interest or the weak layer that existed within the snowpack itself. After we ran the model, we ran this hazard model to predict the critical cut length within or throughout the entire season. So on the left-hand side, we have our critical cut length model modeled for our entire snowpack from our Mid-Collins study plot. And so with all of the data that's collected by you, the users, we're able to look at when user avalanches were reported or new avalanches were reported and relate those to our minimum critical cut length based on the type of avalanche that's put in the observations. So after I harvested that data, I was able to correlate it from my model outputs. So on the right-hand side, on the x-axis, we have our critical cut length, and then on the vertical axis, we have the number of natural avalanches that are reported through the UAC observation program. And you can see as the critical cut length falls to a value of about 22 centimeters, it's a sign of instability, and we see the onset of dry or of slab avalanches. And so while the critical cut length model isn't perfect, we're showing that this is a critical parameter in studying and predicting the onset of dry slab avalanches. So I just wanted to wrap up and just touch on a couple points and say that I'm really thankful for all the help with all the support from the different researchers, and that we've come a long way in showing that this technology can be applied to different avalanche forecasting tools and to help improve hydrological models. I wanted to go ahead and put a plug in and say that we really rely on the users that are watching right now. Keep sending in those detailed observations to the UAC because they help researchers like me validate and keep doing the research that we're doing. Go ahead, and if you're not already, upload your snow pits to SnowPilot. It's a snow pit repository that researchers can use to help validate models like this. Contribute to NASA's CSO snow depth reporting program. This program helps us validate snow depths throughout complex terrain. Snow depth is spatially variable, and getting an idea of how deep the snow is throughout the season is really important for validating these models. And also just brush up on your stability tests these seasons and give the PSTs a try. And if you have any questions after this talk, feel free to reach out to me or one of the PIs on the project, Eric Pardiak, on the bottom right-hand side. And thanks again for all the help, specifically Stephen Clark from U.Avi and Dave Richards from Alta Ski Resort. They've been huge proponents of the DEID. So thank you.
Wow, remarkable research, remarkable application. And you can really see where these brilliant young minds are going, making the practitioner's job, making all of our jobs that much easier. So, man, you guys are doing amazing work. So keep it up. We've got a couple of questions. And, Travis, what's next? What are the future applications for the DEID?
I think the future applications of the DEID are working on validating these instability indices. I think that we also have some future stability indices. I know Mark just joked about TNT being the next stability indice, but that is the next idea, to work with Alta to help validate a TNT or an explosive instability kind of metric. So I think these ideas could kind of go a long way.
Fantastic. How about any plans on implementing more DEID stations throughout the Wasatch or even outlying areas?
Yeah, I think, so I can't speak on behalf of the company that's making the DEID, but I think that there will be more DEIDs deployed in future iterations, and I hope to see the growth of the DEID through different, not only avalanche applications, but Department of Transportation applications.
Great, thanks for that. So some research. Well, it's been done on predicting deep slab avalanches with the use of LiDAR data. Do you think that the SNOWPACK model could be used in conjunction with high-resolution imagery like LiDAR?
I think so. My understanding with the LiDAR scans is they're really able to understand the depth and the surface at which avalanches are occurring from really far distances. And so by having a better understanding of the mechanics that's happening at an avalanche far away, we could then validate a model such as SNOWPACK.
Perfect. Thanks for wrapping your brain around that one. And then I've got a question that as far as once somebody learns how to do a PST, how long does it take with the setup, the implementation, just kind of pulling the trigger on the whole test?
It's a hard test to do depending on the layer of interest that you're wanting to study. It can take, if it's the area that you're interested really close to the surface, not terribly long. You have to dig about 1 meter deep. But, as your snowpack deepens, the length of your PST has to be the depth of interest. So it can be quite a big snow pit to dig.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit on the time-consuming scheme of things. And then, hey, Travis, is this work published where lay people can read more or access these graphs in real time?
We're working on putting up real-time data right now, and that's going to be supplied on the university website, to begin with, an Eric Pardiak's website. So you can give Eric Pardiak, Department of Mechanical Engineering at University of Utah, Google, and that will take you to his webpage, and that data will be posted this year.
Got it. As far as a monetary question is concerned, is it financially realistic for widespread deployment of this in the field? So how about that ROI for the DEID?
The DEID is going to be, I think, competitive with current instrumentation that's out there, such as an ETI bucket. So I believe that the DEID could be very applicable for DOT applications and maybe some more higher-end avalanche centers, a lot, or ski resorts also that we have here in Utah, especially Colorado, Canada, New Zealand, these type of locations.
Great. So some great applications for that. And Travis, you guys have worked on this for a couple of years. So what are some of the limitations that you've seen with the DEID?
The DEID, it requires currently a decent amount of person hours to go up and manage. We're currently working on making it more robust, though, so that it won't require such as cleaning lenses, these types of small managing scenarios.
Okay, got that. Can this model be used to more accurately plot and predict the recovery of a snowpack?
Yes, that's another area of interest that we're talking about. After new snow falls, how long does it take for that new snow layer to bond? As I've shown, the tensile strength of your snowpack is directly correlated to the density within your snow and the crystal type. With the DEID, we have that information, and with the snowpack model, we have that information. So we can begin to predict, depending on how the snow comes in, does it come in heavy, does it come in light? What is that time that snow takes to heal? What is the appropriate time? I think the ballpark estimate, they say 72 hours after a new storm, but that is kind of one of those numbers that's thrown out in research. But I think with the DEID, we could begin to actually quantify that.
Wow, what a great tool to use for the back end of storms, which is every bit as interesting as seeing real-time avalanche data. And one final question, and these questions have been awesome, so thanks for front-loading those. And is the DEID you're working on, was that the first one? Was this the pilot DEID, so to speak?
This is DEID V1, yes. DEID V2 is going to go up this year. So, but yeah, this is DEID V1. And DEID V1 was developed to help validate other instruments too. So there's several other instruments that we're working on in addition to the DEID.